Welcome to Drum Talk and Ask Earl Anything. And today I've got a lot of questions to go through. So my first question comes from Zach Drums. And Zach asked, do you have, or did you move the kit in the room? That was the question. Did you move the kit in the room? And the question is, no. I actually have two kits in the room. And last week I was working on some jazz covers, and I was also working on the roundabout cover. And the roundabout cover was here on this kit, my main kit. And this is where I have my overhead cymbal miking and my tom miking and my bass drum miking. But I also have another whole setup attached to my board. I have a Presonus Studio Live 24x4x2 board. And I have more inputs. And I actually have 4 microphones on the jazz kit. Overhead over top. Then I got a side one. And they have a name for this type of miking. I can't remember. I keep zoning out. But I've done this type of miking before. It's kind of a stereo miking technique. And I have a snare drum mic and a kick drum mic. So I'm going to show you a little pan of the room so you can see what's going on. But what basically my room looks like is the camera's here. And behind the camera is my whole computer setup. It's not on a wall. It's facing into the room. And then I've got drum kits. And there's also a room over here where I have another studio. I call it Studio B, so it's like an isolation booth. It's a very live room. It's not great for recording drums. I've never really set it up where I'm going to set my drum kit in there all the time. So that's my overflow room. Sometimes I'll put a guitar player or a vocalist out there, or sometimes the drums will end up out there. I've recorded drums there. It's just not my favorite place to record drums. This is my favorite place to record drums. Okay, second question by Zach. He had 2. Have you thought about writing a drum book? Now, there's 2 ways of taking that question, okay? One way of taking that question is to say, are you thinking about writing a drum book, meaning like a book like Syncopation or Stick Control or Realistic Rock? And the answer to that question is absolutely not. I'm not thinking about writing any kind of notation drum books. Have I thought about writing other drum books, like about drums, drummers, drum kits, interviewing drummers, something like that? I have thought about those kinds of things, but I haven't gotten to that point in my life where I'm ready to do that. So, to be honest with you, I haven't written any drum books. My wife's the writer in the family. She's actually my wife's written a bunch of books. She's an author. One is called Communicating Love, which is a textbook, and the other one is called Within the Walls, the trilogy. And she's written 3 books Within the Walls, and that's her novel series. And she writes for all kinds of magazines and scholarly writing, etc. My wife's extremely smart and beautiful. So anyhow, me writing a book, not at this point in time. Maybe someday, who knows? It would probably be about drums, vintage drums, or something like that. My next question comes from Steve the drummer. And Steve asked a question about the SPDSX. So he asked, how do I use the SPDSX in a worship setting? I think that's where he was going with this, because he wanted to know how to control the click. So I'm going to give you a little pointers. I worked at a church for a bunch of years where we used clicks, we did not use tracks. So I was always responsible for starting and stopping clicks. And if you've got it on an iPad, starting and stopping clicks is not always the easiest thing in the world to do. I mean, because let me just throw up a click here. So here's the iPad, using the iPad. That's the click. So if I'm playing a groove, then I got to go with my finger to stop it. It's a lot harder to do. Or off an iPhone, it's even harder. I've done it. But we were doing a lot of things where we would flow. So the thing would be, and let me start this over here. Cymbaling out, we'd call it. So we had the click going, and we're cymbaling out, but we needed to go into the next song. So what I would do is I would program the SPDSX top bar to do start click, which was the middle, stop click. The other thing it would do, it would change programs. So here's the program. This is called Be Strong. That was the name of the song. If I wanted to go to the next program, I would hit the outside button, and the click changed. That doesn't sound like it did, because those Those clicks are actually kind of close to one another, but let's see what happens when I go to the next program. This is You'll Come. Alright. So the next one's called Jesus Only. I think it's an old Elevation tune. So that's one way of using this pad. You can actually set up your clicks and set up actual patches. Let's go back to Be Strong. Now Be Strong had a loop. I built a loop for Be Strong. So the way you worked with a loop was you put it on a pad. So that was a tambourine loop. So you got the tambourine loop going. But you've got to lay the tambourine loop down on top of the click. So I put the click on and we play that. And you had to put the loop in right on the beat, otherwise you're in trouble. Now, I also had a pad set up to shut off the sound. So that was the loop, and that shut off the sound. That was the third pad over here. And usually this would be like right about here, so I could really reach it easily. I wasn't reaching across. But in my studio, I don't use it that often, and if I was going to use it, that's how I would goof around with it. Now, SPDSX has got a lot of cool sounds in it. It also has a lot of sounds I've put in it. You can find samples online to put other sounds. But that loop was something I played in the Logic, and then I turned it into a loop and cut it and put it in there. I don't know what other loops I have on here. Shaker. So I would sometimes do this. Put the shaker on. Now, of course, if you don't get that locked perfectly, it's a little out of sync. That's the problem with the live throwing in of some things like loops. But I didn't use all the pads. That was a one-hit tambourine. That was it for that song. And I had each song had different programs. So if I popped it up a few songs, some would have things. Another loop. Then we'd have. I had a one-hit shaker and a tambourine. And that was kind of common. A lot of times it would be tambourines. This was the song Oceans. I had like kind of a drop in there for something. No loops. But I had the click. Anyhow, there's lots of cool stuff we can do with the SPDSX. If I'm giving you guys ideas for questions, ask it next time. SPDSX is definitely an exercise to, there's so much stuff you can do with it. I mean, I'll show you one more thing before my camera runs out. Let's see if I can go all the way down. I was actually in a band doing Shania Twain music. Let's see if I can find the Shania songs. I might have cleared them all out. I think I did. I think I cleared them. Nope. Here's the Shania tunes. This is Shania set 1. So you can also set up a whole set list on here, and then I had the second song. Anyhow, lots of fun. My camera's going to go off in a second. So that's the first 2 questions of Ask Earl Anything, and I still got 5 more questions. More of Ask Earl Anything. The next question comes from Rich Raw Dog. And Rich said, what is my experience playing a large kit? Or do you think you can accomplish everything on a 4-piece kit? First off, you've seen my concert toms. So you know I've played big kits at some point in time in my career. I've had toms everywhere. I don't tend to know what to do with toms everywhere anymore. Back in the 70s, it was kind of, one of the things we were doing was lots of toms to make melodic lines. But today's music's usually 2 toms. That's it. Maybe 3, so you have a 5-piece kit. This is a preferred 5-piece kit for me. Would be where I've got coming down like this versus on the rack tom. But this Sunday I'm playing in a church where they got the rack tom. I'm just as comfortable playing the rack tom, to be honest. But I've learned how to play most of my gigs, because just for the ease of transportation, with two toms and a kick and a snare. It's considered a jazz kit, they call it, but it's not. A lot of rock guys are playing the small kits today. It's just ease of carrying stuff around. I love Neil Peart. I love Hal Blaine. I loved when the music was calling for more stuff. Like, I remember back in the 80s when I first saw Simmons drums. I mean, the coolest thing was Simmons drums, and having them all over the kit with your stuff, like a Bill Bruford kind of setup or something. So I like having lots of stuff, but in actuality, toting lots of stuff as you get older becomes not worth it. And most of the gigs that I've played out for money, you don't really need it. One of my favorite gigs I played about 20 years ago was a blues gig. And on this blues gig, we were playing the drum. I would come with a kick drum and a snare drum, a cymbal, and a hi-hat. That was the gig. And they were happy with me just playing that, because it was a guitar player gig, and they just wanted me to play. Or play some funky. So I was just playing grooves is what it came down to. Whatever the guitar players would strum, I would play grooves and we'd make it happen. I didn't need a lot of toms and stuff. Matter of fact, it made me play differently. You should try it sometime. Just try playing, take away everything, and playing a song without everything on it. That's kind of cool. When I did the 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover cover, I left the small tom off, so I never went to the small tom. Well, one of my versions of it I did that. I'm not sure the second, I think the second version I did, the one that got up there with the music. I think I took the tom away and just had the camera right there, so it was watching me with a floor tom and a snare drum. And it was reminiscent of Steve Gadd on Saturday Night Live. The first time I saw Steve Gadd, didn't know it was Steve Gadd. He was playing with Paul Simon, playing that song. But you should try playing a gig with less is more. You know, and a kick and a snare and a cymbal and a hi-hat, you play a lot less stuff, but you become a lot more creative. So, hope that answers that question. The next one comes from CCM Drummer. And CCM Drummer asks, what is your opinion on mixing rims die-cast with triple flange? Now, I don't have any drums in the studio where I've done this right now, but I have a drum that I use at my band, the Swigs, rehearsal space. It's an old Gretsch 5x14 chrome over brass snare drum. And it came with die-cast hoops on both sides. And at one point I put triple flange on both sides. I found it opened up the drum a lot more like a Black Beauty was. But then I got tired of that, and one day before I took the drum over there to the rehearsal space almost 2 years ago, what I did was I put the die-cast hoop back on and didn't change the bottom rim. So I got the bottom die-cast rim here and the triple flange over there on the drum. So I got triple flange on the bottom, die-cast on the top. Does it change the sound? I think it does. How does it change the sound? It depends on the drum, to be honest. I mean, I don't know. I like die-cast rims on toms. Okay, I've never had a tom with a triple flange on the bottom because these Gretsch drums come with die-cast on both sides. So I've never really tried it. Triple flange hoops seem to be lighter, so the drum opens up a different way. As a matter of fact, if you've listened to the Gretsch Brooklyn series, which is something I've listened to online a bunch, I've never got to play a set, they've got the new triple flange hoops. They're kind of like a straight edge, and they really sound more open than the classic Gretsch toms, which are die-cast. But the classic Gretsch toms have a very focused sound, and a lot of guys love that tom sound. So I'd say on that snare drum, that drum changes when you put triple flange on it versus the die-cast. And with the die-cast, it's got just more of a solid punch. With the triple flange, it kind of opens up that brass drum a little bit. I'm getting ready to go back to triple flange on my Black Beauty. Right now I've got a set of Tama die-cast hoops that I took off of a drum I had for a while and I sold on eBay one day. And that guy got the triple flange. I kept the die-cast. I wanted them, so I kept them. But right now it's on my Black Beauty. I don't know. I think it's a preference. You try things, you know. I try all kinds of stuff. That's what I do until I find something I like, you know. And I will tell you that the triple flange on the bottom and the die cast on the top of that snare drum doesn't bother me because I haven't changed in the last 2 years. So, and matter of fact, the heads are the same and they sound fine. That's another thing. A lot of guys feel like you got to change heads all the time. And if you got the capital to do it, the money to do it, then go ahead and do it. But if you don't, you know, you'd be surprised how long these heads last, especially some of these old Remos. They actually sound better sometimes. I know guys like Steve Jordan leave the old heads on their old drums that they bought the drums with because they still have the magic to them, you know. Now, other guys think you should change your heads every couple weeks or couple months or whatever you can afford, I would say, okay. But that's another question. Nobody asked that one. That was a freebie. Leonard Smith asked a question. What are your thoughts on tonewoods? Now, I think this question's about shell construction. So, Leonard, if I got it wrong, write me and define the question again. I'll take another shot next week. But if you're talking about different types of woods for different drums, I think different types of woods for different drums give different sounds. Maple drums have a certain sound versus birch drums. And birch drums have a different sounds than mahogany drums, or than walnut drums, okay, or cherry drums. I've been blessed to play a lot of maple drums. I've played fiberglass drums and plexiglass drums. I've also played birch, and I've played mahogany. And I have to tell you something. If I was going to go out and buy a brand new kit today, I would like to find somebody that makes a beautiful mahogany shell with some really those kind of Gretsch type bearing edges, the rounded bearing edges, baseball bat bearing edges, and get that really fat, deep mahogany sound. That is a sound I really love on old Ludwig drums. I had an old Club Date kit, and I believe they were mahogany, and it just sounded amazing. So I do think the type of wood you use on the drums does affect the sound. Now, when you're spending $5,000, $8,000 on a drum kit, you better get the sound right and you better love it. Okay? So the short bet is always go with maple. Okay? But if you've ever played birch, like Yamaha recording drums, they're beautiful drums and they sound totally different than maple drums. They're punchier. They got a punchier to them. A lot of guys that had the recording customs, they liked the punchy toms, but they didn't like the kick drum. They wanted a maple kick drum. So I know guys like Gad would do that. They'd switch the kick drums out. Or another guy that did that was Paul Lime from Nashville. He had a maple custom kick drum, and then he was using the birch toms. So the birch toms have a really certain sound, and that recording custom birch sound was the sound of the 80s is when it came to drums. Everybody was using Yamaha recording custom drums in the studios. It was either that or an old maple Gretsch kit. So that's what you heard. Okay, so the last two questions come from Jay Klein and Aqua Anim. Now, Aqua's a new friend and Jay's a new friend. So I'm going to start with Jay's question. Jay's question said, once upon a time, I heard you mention you are a rock drummer. Is that correct? Okay, let me be clear. My roots are being a rock drummer. I started off being a rock drummer. Now, I listened to a lot of jazz rock as a kid because Chicago was my favorite band, so I definitely had a jazz rock background. You saw on TV, the guys you would see on TV playing other than the rock bands would be the jazz drummers like Ed Shaughnessy and Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa when I was a kid. I didn't see much of Gene Krupa, to be honest, but Buddy Rich was on TV a lot. By the time I got to high school, I was playing in the jazz ensemble at high school, and of course I was learning more like Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman kind of music than really jazz. But by the time I got to college, I started studying jazz, but everybody at my college was real jazz players, so I was the rock drummer. I wasn't a jazz player, okay? And to this day, if any of these guys saw my videos, they'd say, yeah, you're still a rock player, not a jazz player. I was telling a good friend of mine, Scott Hazen, the other day, hey, all these guys on YouTube think I'm a jazz player, and he started laughing. Now, Scott's my own teacher. He was a real jazz player. I mean, he played outside jazz. I mean, when I met him, he was the guy that told me as as a youngster. He said, chill out, man. You know, listen to Miles Davis Bitches Brew, man, and light one up. You know, that's what Scott told me as a 17-year-old kid getting ready to go to college. You know, just chill out and listen to Miles and listen to this music coming out. He was a jazzer at heart. He had that thing. You know, I never considered myself a jazz musician. So when you guys say I'm a jazz musician, it kind of cracks me up. Now cracks me up in a good way because number one, I have learned the vocabulary of jazz and I can swing, and I think if I'm playing in an environment where I'm playing Great American Songbook stuff, big band jazz, Frank Sinatra kind of stuff, or even girl singers in that genre, I think I play that stuff well, and I love playing brushes and everything else, but my roots are rock music, okay? And I've learned how to play backbeat rock music for a long time, and that's really what my roots are. And that's what I do. So Jay, it's kind of funny, you know, guys don't think I can play rock music. Now, I guess the question is, what's rock music? Okay? For me, rock music starts back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and I played all that music. When we got to the 90s and grunge, I could hang in that arena too, but when we started getting into the more progressive metal stuff, didn't have a desire to play it. By the time we got into screamo music, which my son was into, I would hang with my son and we'd jam on screamo music. I actually played on a screamo album, just to let you know. I produced an album here at the studio. It was a screamo album. The drummer quit halfway through the album. I finished it. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a screamo drummer, but I've done it. I've done a lot of that kind of music. I've done a lot of different styles of music. And I respect guys that have that genre, you know, those different genres where they're really in it. You know, like, I'm not a Mike Portnoy. It's not my thing. Okay? Or Neil Peart. But I've played Kansas tunes. I've played Rush tunes. If I have to play that kind of music, I can play it. I like more solid backbeat music. That's really what I like. And I like grooving on backbeat music. And anything with a backbeat I like to play. So that's just what I enjoy playing. And the fact that the jazz music comes out, the reason why it comes out is the fact that I have a lot of these Music Minus One covers without drums, and the jazz music doesn't have any structure that says you have to play that lick. And what I find when you're playing classic rock tunes, guys want to hear certain licks. They want to hear that fill played the right way. And when it's not played the right way, they say, hey, you know, Bill Bruford didn't play it that way, or Jeff Porcaro didn't play it that way, or Steve Gadd didn't do it that way. And they're right. I'm not Steve Gadd, I'm not Jeff Porcaro, and I'm not Bill Bruford. I'm Earl Bennett. And Earl Bennett plays like Earl Bennett. So what you see in my jazz covers is you see my freedom coming out to be who I am. So I let that out, and the jazz music lets me play with a little bit more freedom. So that's what you hear in my jazz playing. But I'm a rocker at heart, which brings me to the second part of the question. What's the story behind getting the name The Hammer? Now, I was in a band that did a record in Nashville back in 1987, and we were getting ready to go on the road, so I bought a new snare drum. And the snare drum I bought was a Pearl free-floating snare drum with a brass shell, 3.5 by 14 Pearl free-floating brass piccolo snare drum. Now, the day I bought this drum, I should have bought the other drum I had my hands on. It was a Ludwig brass Superphonic. Brass. Keystone badge. Superphonic. Okay? It might have even been a WFL drum. It was real old. The reason I didn't get it was it had blemishes like some of my cymbals had from being old. Like this China's got some blemishes on it that you guys don't see because I shined it up a little bit, but there's blemishes on it. It's brass. Brass gets blemishes. Okay? Well, this drum had these blemishes on it, and I just wasn't hip enough to take that drum, even though I played it and said, boy, it sounds great. Instead, I went home with the Pearl free-floating brass piccolo. Well, the Pearl free-floating brass piccolo snare drum was loud as all get out. And of course, that was the sound of 1987, 88, 89. Everybody was going with piccolo snare drums. If you go back to Modern Drum and look at ads back then, you'll see Dave Weckl with a brass piccolo snare drum. You'll see that David Garibaldi even had a piccolo made for him. That part of his signature Yamaha snare drums was a piccolo. I think it's a 4x14. And it looks blue, but it's blue brass. Okay, they they colorize the brass. But so I bought this snare drum and I bring it to rehearsal, and I'm sitting there and I start fop, boom, fop. I start banging out a beat, and the lead singer in the band's right in front of me turns around and goes, "Man, you are hammering that backbeat out." Like I was blowing his ears out. He goes, "I'm going to call you the Hammer." And he started calling me the Hammer. And it became my stage name for the next bunch of concerts, and then every band I was in after that picked up the name. So the Hammer comes from the backbeat. It comes from the 2 and the 4. That's where it comes from. The Hammer represents the backbeat, and that's where I got the name from. The name of the singer was Russ Scalzo in the band Saved by Grace, and he's the one who gave me the name, and after that it just kind of stuck, and that's what I use. So Earl the Hammer Bennett comes from those days of being a rock drummer. So I am a rock drummer, Jay, but I like playing jazz music. I like playing all kinds of music. That's my thing, playing as many different styles as possible. Alright? So, thank you for watching Ask Earl Anything. Thank you for subscribing to my channel. If you want to ask a question on next week's show, leave a question in this week's Ask Earl Anything comments, and I will answer your question next week in next week's show. This week went a little bit long because I had so many questions. But I hope you enjoy the questions. I enjoyed answering the questions. Hope you enjoy my answers to the questions. And I look forward to doing another one of these shows next week. Thanks for watching Ask Earl Anything. Please subscribe. Have a great day. God bless. Bye.